The chamber was suffocating, not from heat, nor from lack of oxygen, but from the weight of 1,000 unspoken judgments pressing down on one man. Madison Voss stood in the center of the Galactic Council's Grand Hall, a coliseum of polished obsidian and shimmering energy fields, where the most powerful species in the galaxy dictated the fates of countless worlds. And today, they were deciding humanity's. "Let us dispense with the formalities." Grand Marshal Zarquan's voice slithered through the room like a blade drawn across the stone. He sat upon the highest throne, his violet exoskeleton gleaming under the artificial suns above. "The humans wish for full membership in this council. Yet, I ask, what have they proven?" His 6 eyes blinked asynchronously, slow. Murmurs rippled through the assembly, chitinous whispers, guttural grunts, and electronic pulses of artificial minds all humming. Madison inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of every human life on his shoulders. His suit, meticulously pressed before the meeting, now felt like a straitjacket. His jaw ached from the effort of keeping his expression neutral. He could hear the subtle beeps of the translator system embedded in his ear, converting dozens of alien tongues into something comprehensible. He didn't need a translator to know what they thought of him. "They call themselves warriors," Zarquan continued, voice dripping with condescension. "Survivors of a violent, primitive world. Yet, what have they conquered? What great wars have they won against the void? What legacy do they leave behind, besides their fragile bones and overconfidence?" Madison let the words sink in. He'd been warned this would happen. Celine Carter had practically written a thesis on the xenophobic tendencies of the High Council, but knowing and experiencing it firsthand were two different things. He smiled, just enough to show teeth. "With all due respect, Grand Marshal, you seem to misunderstand us. Humans don't need to conquer the void. We thrive in it." Zarquan leaned forward, his mandibles clicking. "Such arrogance. Tell me, Ambassador, do your kind still settle disputes with physical combat, like the mindless predators of the outer fringes?" That was the moment Madison knew. The trap had already been set. The council chamber wasn't a stage for diplomacy today. It was an execution ground. He felt it before he saw it, the shift in energy, the way the air seemed to thin as eyes locked onto him with focus. The council chamber had never been a fair court. It was a coliseum, and today, the lions were hungry. Zarquan spread his forearms wide. "Then let us test this claim, in accordance with the oldest law of the council, the right of challenge." The room went still. Even the artificial minds, the glowing spheres of sentient data streams, flickered in hesitation. Madison's breath slowed. The right of challenge. The ancient law allowed a species' worth to be determined by a single duel. It hadn't been invoked in centuries. Zarquan's mandibles curled in satisfaction. "I nominate my champion, General Corvex." A sound like rolling thunder filled the chamber as a behemoth rose from his seat in the war section of the assembly. 4 meters of engineered perfection. His armor fused directly to his exoskeleton, his movements deliberate, unhurried, because predators never rush. Madison didn't move. He didn't blink. He knew a test when he saw one, and he knew what they expected of him. Fear, weakness, a moment's hesitation before he declined, before he backed down. Instead, he exhaled slowly, tilted his head, and smiled. "Well," he said, voice calm as the eye of a hurricane, "that's certainly one way to settle a debate." A flicker of confusion crossed Zarquan's expression, just for a second. Madison let the silence drag, let the weight of his words settle over them like a storm cloud on the horizon. Then, deliberately, he stepped forward and spoke the words that would alter humanity's place in the stars forever. "I accept." A hush fell over the chamber, an unnatural silence that seemed to overwhelm even the hum of the station's artificial atmosphere. No one had expected Madison to accept. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed. Then the chaos. Voices overlap in dozens of alien languages, and the translators struggled to keep up. Some council members were outraged. Others laughed, smug in their certainty that the challenge was nothing more than a formality before execution. Above them all, Grand Marshal Zarquan simply watched. His 6 eyes gleamed with something between amusement and hunger. "A bold claim, human," he said, voice amplified by the chamber's acoustics. "But boldness is not the same as wisdom. You have sealed your species' fate." Madison met his gaze, unflinching, or changed it. The Grand Marshal's mandibles clicked once, twice. Then he waved a clawed hand. dismissive. So be it. The right of challenge will commence in 3 cycles. The arena will be prepared. Your opponent, General Corvex, will have the honor of testing whether your kind is worthy of standing among us. The laughter returned, rolling through the chamber like an oncoming storm. Madison turned on his heel, walking toward the exit with measured steps. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing him rush. The moment he stepped into the corridor beyond, the doors sealing behind him, a voice exploded in his ear. Have you lost your goddamn mind? Doctor. Celine Carter was pacing the length of the private chamber when he arrived. Her datapad clutched so tightly in her hands that Madison was surprised it hadn't shattered. The room was small and sterile, with walls lined with holographic displays, a place meant for quiet diplomatic planning. Instead, it now served as a fight room. Madison dropped into the chair opposite her, rubbing his temples. Good to see you too, Celine. Celine threw the datapad onto the table with a sharp clack. Don't do that. Don't sit there looking all relaxed and, Madison, what the hell was that? He exhaled, leaning back. That was me making sure humanity isn't treated like a damn joke anymore. Oh, great, she snapped, running a hand through her tightly coiled curls. So instead, we get to be a cautionary tale about why you don't let primates into galactic politics. Madison smirked. Come on, Celine. No faith? Celine's glare could have melted steel. Faith doesn't change the fact that you just agreed to fight Corvex. Do you even know what that thing is? He did. Corvex wasn't just a warrior. He was a legend. A towering monstrosity of engineered muscle and exoskeletal armor, with more confirmed kills than some entire planetary militaries. He'd fought in over 100 sanctioned duels. He had never lost. Madison shrugged. Yeah, big guy. Lots of arms. Bad attitude. Celine groaned. Madison. He's a bioforged warrior, enhanced for combat. His exoskeleton can withstand plasma rounds. His reflexes outmatch a standard neural AI. You? You're a diplomat who runs out of breath when you jog up the stairs. Madison grinned. That was one time. Celine threw up her hands. We are so screwed. Maybe, Madison admitted, sitting up. Or maybe we just need to think a little differently. Celine stopped pacing, narrowed her eyes. You have a plan. Not yet. He tapped the table. Thoughtful. But I will. Celine folded her arms. Okay, let's pretend, for the sake of my sanity, that I believe you've survived via alien combat sport. What's the next step? Madison leaned forward, his grin sharpening. We find a way to win. For the first time since stepping into that chamber, the weight in his chest lightened just a little. Because here was the thing no one in that room had understood. Humans didn't pick fights, they didn't think they could win, and they sure as hell didn't fight fair. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of movement, calculations, and controlled panic. Madison had never been one for long training montages. He wasn't a soldier, he wasn't a martial artist. He was a diplomat. But survival had always been humanity's greatest skill, and if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was learning. Celine barely slept, working through hundreds of hours of combat footage, analyzing Corvex's fights, searching for patterns, weaknesses, anything they could use. The warlord fought like a force of nature. He was faster, stronger, and had decades of experience. But Madison? He had something Corvex didn't: adaptability. On the first day, the station's training hall was a cavernous space filled with adaptive sparring droids, but Madison might as well have been fighting gravity itself. He was slow. Every simulated battle ended the same way, with him on the floor and gasping. Celine watched from the sidelines, her arms crossed, frustration etched across her face. This isn't going to work. Madison, you can't outmuscle him. Madison wiped the sweat from his brow. I know. Then what the hell are we doing here? Madison grinned through his exhaustion. Learning how to lose. Celine blinked. Come again? He gestured for the droid to reset. The guy's undefeated because no one's ever lasted long enough to study him. They fight. They lose, they go home in pieces. But if I can make it long enough to see, I can find a way. Celine exhaled, rubbing her temples. This is the worst plan I've ever heard. Madison cracked his neck. Yeah, but it's still a plan. By the second day, so did the knowledge. Every loss gave him something new. A fraction of a second where the droid overcorrected. A moment where its stance left it off balance. Celine sat hunched over a monitor, replaying footage at half speed. Her eyes narrowed. See how he shifts before a power strike? His weight is too far forward. If you can bait that. I can break his momentum, Madison finished. Celine sat back, studying him. He was exhausted. But there was something else there now. Something sharp. A gleam in his eyes she recognized. By the third day, the shift happened. The droids still overwhelmed him, still sent him sprawling, but Madison wasn't losing the same way twice. He was slipping through openings, countering, turning his opponent's strength against them. Celine watched him dodge, pivot around a follow-up act, and land a precise, calculated hit to the droid's exposed joint. The machine locked up, and its balance was lost. Madison exhaled. That's how we win. Celine stared at the frozen droid. I can't believe that worked. Madison grinned, still catching his breath. Believe it. That night, Celine pulled up Corvex's complete combat history. She went through each fight with precision, recording every slight inconsistency. At 3 a.m., she found it. Corvex had fought in the siege of Tarzor years ago. His kind regenerated fast, but not perfectly, and Madison didn't need perfect. He just needed an edge. Celine burst into the training hall, where Madison was finishing a cool-down set. His left side, she said, breathless. It never fully healed. Madison's smile turned. Good, he said. Now we make sure he feels it. The betting pools were still heavily stacked against him. The Galactic media treated the upcoming duel as a formality. No one believed Madison Voss stood a chance. The night before the fight, as the station's lights dimmed to artificial evening, Celine found Madison standing by the observation deck, staring out into the vast emptiness of space. He looked calm. She folded her arms. You ready for this? Madison smirked. Not even a little. Celine chuckled, shaking her head. You know, this is insane, right? Oh. Silence stretched between them. The stars outside were unmoving, ancient, and indifferent. Then Celine spoke, quieter this time. You don't have to prove anything. You know. Madison turned to look at her. Really look at her. Yeah, he said. I do. Celine sighed, rubbing her arms like she was suddenly cold. Come back alive. Madison grinned. Deal. And for the first time, just for a moment, she let herself believe he might pull this off. Towering walls of obsidian metal stretched high above the gathered audience, their surfaces pulsing with energy fields. The floor shimmered, adaptive nanotech shifting beneath the feet of those who fought, reacting to pressure and movement. This was not a place of ceremony. This was a battlefield disguised as a spectacle. Madison Voss stepped into the center of it, rolling his shoulders, exhaling slowly and steadily. His heartbeat was a drum. Above him, thousands of alien eyes watched from tiered balconies, their murmurs a mix of amusement, curiosity, and expectation. None of them thought he would last long. Some of them had already placed bets on how many bones he'd break before it was over. At the far end of the arena, a massive gate hissed open, thick steam rolling out like breath from the mouth of a beast. The ground trembled beneath a weight not yet seen. And then, he stepped through, General Corvex. 4 meters of armored terror, his exoskeleton gleaming in the artificial light. His body was a fortress of plated muscle, each movement deliberate, calculated. He carried no weapons. He was the weapon. His glowing red eyes locked onto Madison, and for a moment, the arena felt too small. A voice echoed through the chamber, the arbiter of the right. A crystalline being whose form refracted the light into blinding prisms, raised one shimmering hand. The combatants are present. The challenge is acknowledged. The duel will proceed under the ancient laws of the Council. May honor guide your battle. The moment stretched. A single breath. A frozen heartbeat. Then the first tone rang out. Madison let his body loosen, bouncing lightly on the balls of his feet. Corvex remained still, a predator watching his prey. Second tone. Celine was somewhere in the crowd, watching, analyzing. He could almost hear her voice in his head, going over the plan again and again. Stay mobile. Make him chase. Read his movements. Third tone. Corvex moved. The warlord lunged with impossible speed, a blur of black and silver. Madison barely twisted aside in time. Heat rushing past him as a fist the size of a boulder crashed into the ground where he had been standing a fraction of a second ago. The impact sent a shockwave rippling through the arena, the floor buckling from the force. Madison didn't stop moving. He pivoted, darting backward, forcing distance. Corvex's mandibles clicked in amusement. Fast, he rumbled, but not fast enough. He lunged again. This time, Madison saw it. The weight shift, the slight overextension in the forward stride. He sidestepped at the last second. He let it graze past, using the momentum to roll away, to make the warlord correct his stance. Corvex's head tilted, assessing. You learn as you move. Interesting. Madison grinned, wiping sweat from his brow. You talk too much. The audience roared in laughter. Corvex's eyes burned brighter. Then the real fight began. Madison dodged, evaded, twisting, and slipping through the warlord's onslaught like smoke through steel. He couldn't afford to take a direct hit, but he didn't have to win with strength. He only had to make Corvex miss. And with every missed strike, Madison saw more. The slight drag in the warlord's left side. The way his stance favored balance over aggression. The old wound, buried beneath armor and arrogance. Celine's voice rang in his memory. It never fully healed. Make him feel it. The next time Corvex lunged, Madison didn't just dodge. He turned his entire body into motion, rolling under the strike and driving his full weight into the weak spot with a vicious, calculated elbow. Corvex staggered. For the first time in the warlord's career, he had been forced back by an opponent a fraction of his size. The arena went deathly silent. Madison took a breath. Corvex slowly straightened, turning his head toward Madison with something unreadable in his glowing eyes. Then he smiled and charged. Madison barely had time to react before the world turned into a blur of impact and force. Corvex's arms caught him mid-dodge. He was lifted. His vision flashed white. The taste of copper filled his mouth. He had seconds before a shadow loomed. Corvex dropped onto him like a collapsing mountain. Madison twisted. He didn't think, he reacted, his instincts acting faster than his body could process. He barely slipped out from beneath the weight, but not without cost. And then he smiled. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but something about it made the warlord pause. Just for a second.